Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Back with us today is meteorologist Greg Soulje. You might recognize Greg from past episodes here with us, or perhaps you catch Greg's weather forecasts on This Week in Agribusiness on RFD TV and a number of other stations across the nation
Sure.
each week. Welcome, Greg. Great to have you with us again.
Thank you, Sarah. Nice to be with you each and every time we get together here. And welcome to carte blanche summertime weather across the country this
Yeah,
week so far.
yeah. Let's get into that here in a sec. First, I want to invite our audience to post any questions they might have for you. They might sure have some, given the last couple days in
Sure
your
hope so. Sure hope
input.
so. Yeah.
But we do want to thank them for taking the time to tune in. We are coming from myself. I'm coming from Louisville with the Poultry Science Association meeting down here in Louisville this week. But before I came down here, I got into some kind of crazy Midwest weather there out in the Chicagoland area.
Yep.
My gosh, what do we have? Like 17 tornadoes and a lot of rain, and even I think there was an earthquake one night there. But yeah, but
Yes.
what are you seeing? What's going on, Greg?
Well, yeah, it's been everything but the kitchen sink coming on down. And, typically in the summertime season, a little rain, a little sun, a little warmth, and all of a sudden it's harvest season. But not this year. It goes back to a definition that we kick around whenever I do farm meetings or presentations. What's normal in weather anymore? Because it just doesn't fit the usual nice textbook 30-year averages like we define stuff as. But that earthquake, for any of our viewers that picked us up out around Somonauk, Illinois, around Yorkville, what's out that way, Elburn. 3.4 on the Richter scale. And I have some family out that way. We texted them that evening, and they felt it. Thought maybe one of the other people in the family there fell out of the bed, but it was just the tremor out there, which is quite unusual. Part of that new Madrid or Madrid fault, however you want to pronunciate it, down there, located over the southeastern part of Missouri and far south Illinois. So that was the story there. 8 tornadoes on the ground at one time in the Chicagoland area. It's pretty amazing for that you evacuate the ground control people, the people who load the airplanes, and the tower itself. But you had people in planes out there on the tarmac and the runways dealing with this, where there were, let's see, there was an actual sighting at least on cameras around O'Hare of a tornado, and the actual there was a tornado observed by the observer at Midway Airport for folks who come in and out of the Chicagoland area. So we had all bases covered here on severe weather a few days ago.
Well, it's funny you say that because I got stuck at O'Hare during a storm here recently when I was returning, and I'm in the safe shelter. My colleague's sitting out in a little plane headed to South Dakota on the tarmac, and I'm texting her going, "Are you okay? Where are you?" Like, I'm out in the wind out here. So yeah, it can be a lot of unknowns when we go through those kinds of things. But
Yeah,
so what do
yeah.
you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder where if you couldn't just not thinking that just contact the tower and move these planes, but if the tower evacuates, you're pretty much on your own. So
Right.
that's, I think, the unfortunate situation. But people sheltering underneath the runways there. Anyway, back to the matters at hand here.
Yep. Let's talk some weather.
Okay, we shall. And first, kind of a quick snapshot on the rains over the past 7 days. This is a July 10th to 17 kind of a total accumulation. If you were just to let the rain gauge to total up, and if it was big enough to hold it all, these are some of the totals. You can see little speckles of yellow and see the key to the left. That's 8 to 12 inches worth of rain around Rockford. They were beat up, I believe, Stevenson County, west of Rockford, 93-mile-an-hour winds. There was a co-op observer who claimed he had a 101-mile-an-hour wind out there, but 90 is going to do damage. So I'm sure there's some green snap issues out there, even with a somewhat limited crop canopy compared to what you would have later into July and August and September. Another little speckle out there just east of maybe Burlington, Keokuk, close to 10 inches there. And of course, saw on social media some of the failures of dams and levees east of East St. Louis, down around, I believe it's Nashville, Illinois, I believe that's Washington County, Illinois. They had easily 10 to 12 inches of rain. Already saturated grounds there, Sarah. So look at the stripe of wet weather-related issues across the Corn Belt. But surprisingly, corn as a whole, USDA yesterday morning, as a whole, 68% good to excellent. Like to know where they were really where that's at in the Eastern Corn Belt locales, but at least there are some folks that are doing relatively well apart from the recent rains here and in the upper Midwest. And from the specter of river and stream flooding, you can see it obviously into the Mississippi Basin portions of Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, and still some ongoing flooding issues, I think, that are with runoff in mind over parts of central and southern Illinois and eastern Missouri. Remember, they had farther towards the Missouri River, they had a wet spring. They've had a recent bout of wet weather down there as well. So, pastures and the dryness and drought issues gone. Pastures may be losing some quality with haying operations, not to mention the southwestern end of the Corn Belt. So, yeah, lots of weather headlines in that stripe, kind of along and south of I-80 from Iowa into Illinois, Indiana, and northwest Ohio, whether it was severe weather or flooding rainfall. To kind of put things into perspective here, that's what it looked like here on the 28th of May on the drought monitor over the eastern Corn Belt. Sections of the western areas were in relatively good shape. That dryness and drought was moving away. Again, the range of weather that kept it too wet in eastern Kansas, Oklahoma. That's still an ongoing issue, and a range of winter wheat conditions in those same areas. And of course, the dryness and drought, no surprise, into the Rio Grande, eastern Texas, coming off Beryl. They're still trying to get some lingering power issues into play there from the 10 to 12 inches of rain. Last week's drought monitor, this is what we had in the eastern Corn Belt locales. I'm sure, we're going to have runoff issues and flooding, obviously, that we've talked about, but there should be just a general net effect to improve soil moisture, where those rains did focus on the worst dryness and drought-related areas of eastern and central Illinois, Indiana, into Ohio, and again, a range Jekyll and Hyde set up with winter wheat fields, although harvest is pretty much done. But from a moisture standpoint, eastern Kansas, Oklahoma, into eastern Texas, still ongoing into the Rio Grande. And interestingly, very much dry-ridden and drought-ridden over the Mid-Atlantic, the Carolinas, Georgia. Sarah, I think it's like 68 to 72% of the corn. I know it's not a big corn-producing area, but is poor and very poor in North Carolina. And cotton is struggling as well, although it tends to be kind of a drier related type of crop out there. So that's the story on the story that's been the story. Flooding, severe into parts of the Corn Belt, and probably too much of a good thing as well down into the southeastern and eastern plains of lower Mississippi Valley over the past 2 to 3 weeks.
As I mentioned, we're at a meeting here, and we ran into a gentleman from Georgia, and he was talking about how dry, and they keep getting those clouds that are coming through, and
Yep.
the black clouds, and all of a sudden there's no precipitation that comes out of that. They're just like, it's so disappointing. So hate to always see that drought, but the flooding can be very damaging as well. Just probably a little more localized than, say, what a drought would be.
Exactly. And that's a pretty impressive setup over there. So I would imagine there are some folks who are really, I don't want to say hoping for, but maybe get some semblance of a tropical pattern to get going. I think it'll happen later this summer. But they're kind of in a world of hurt from, the Virginias down in through northern and central Florida. They did have about 6 weeks ago a pretty sizable rain from Lauderdale on southward, but Georgia hurting, Mississippi, Alabama, and then you go into, the Delta region west. It's been too much of a good thing. And I believe it was last year where there was not even enough wet grounds to help flood these rice fields. Sugarcane was lost because of the dryness and drought last year in Louisiana and the Delta region. So quite a range from one year to another, once again, compliments of Mother Nature.
What else you got for us, Greg?
Well, the outlook here, now I don't put this is not my outlook, but I'm just as sort of an equal opportunity weather forecaster here. We've got the outlook that came out at the end of June from the feds that runs kind of correspondingly to the drought monitor. They put out a monthly and seasonal outlook for dryness and drought, and this thing has already gone belly up with they seem to think, and we do not agree at all on this, but it's there. Their expectation was increased dryness and drought. Well, we've already put a pretty good dent in that, and there is more to come. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the broadcast here. That we're not done with the wet weather pattern, by the way, for the eastern and southern Corn Belt. So there it is through the eastern and southern Corn Belt locales. Still dry, still drought ridden. It is remaining overtly wet, likely to stay that way, eastern Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And they're thinking, and this is a little bit pessimistic. I think there'll be a somewhat better than expected monsoon setup in the southwestern states and the tropics in the not only in the Atlantic are they're quiet there, but they're ramping up in the Pacific. And we do have a tendency sometimes in this particular up air configuration to bring tropical features of some semblance, maybe not necessarily a hurricane, but across Baja California into Old Mexico through the Rio Grande and set it up over the southwestern part of the country. Their seasonal outlook, again, through the end of September, and this is a little bit optimistic, at least thinking with regard to dryness and drought. There is a drier period ahead later this summer into autumn, and that may work to our benefit. But this looks to be overdone with the bullish look at dryness and drought expanding again. Don't see it happening in the Corn Belt and back into the plains, western states, as you would expect. And again, this looks to be a forecast that may go belly up over the mid-Atlantic and the southeastern states with a significantly wet and multi-week wet weather pattern ahead. And you'll see that on our forecast here coming up a little bit later on in the broadcast. So we'll just move ahead here, Sarah, and kind of set the table. Like I've said before, you build a shelter, an equipment shed, you got to get the footings dug out, the foundation in, and you go from there. And this is the way we'll set up the forecast here. And the squiggly lines are back. This takes us through July 4th. Just think that the winds are kind of running from northwest to southeast or southwest to northeast. They're running parallel to these winds. And where they're packed together, they're stronger. There's a range of temperatures up aloft. You see that with a feature in the Pacific Northwest. And one through eastern Canada and the northeast of New England, in between what we call a ridge. A ridge is typically sinking air, hot air, dry air. Those clouds may form, as that gentleman pointed out, down in Georgia in the Delta, but the air is too warm up aloft to get any significant rain going. And so there's hot weather in the plains, the southwestern part of the country, and no surprise there. Sometimes the western states, it is the time of year where there's just enough mid and upper level moisture to build the clouds, and you get a lightning strike to go, and then that strike hits the tender vegetation. And I think there's already 130 acres up in smoke in parts of Oregon right now with the fire season breaking out there. But of more significance, you'll see that little U-shaped configuration. Not a big deal, a little squiggly line. It drops from the Midwest to Texas. Well, it represents A, winds are very light up aloft. B, rising air currents being able to make rain. Fronts are going to get stuck there because the winds are rolling parallel to those winds from Texas to the Ohio Valley. So the bottom line, it's a weather pattern shaping up. And if you were to put a basic weather map on here through the 24th of July, you can see we move from the Wednesday, Thursday time frame to early next week in that middle bottom panel. And you can see kind of a couple little lows trickling out of Texas through the Ohio Valley into the Buckeye State, Lower Lakes region. Not impressive lows for the time of year, but they represent little disturbances, pockets of energy, outflow boundary, whatever you want to define it as. And we'll just kind of broad brush it here, but it's a way to make rain. And you see that front stuck, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, kind of waffles back into the Ohio Valley. So there may be a 2 week to 2.5 week period of wet weather ahead for eastern Texas, the Delta. Beneficial rain for the Carolinas, beneficial rain for the Tennessee Valley, beneficial rain for the areas of Florida, back into Mississippi. But it gets to a point, ultimately, it's too much of a good thing. The steering currents are weak, and you come up ultimately with big rainfall totals. And we'll take a look at that in just a second. Correspondingly here, we try to line up rain systems in the eastern and southeastern part of the country and the movement of weather systems across the middle part of the country with the tropics. At least for the next 2 days, there's nothing going on. Probably the next 4 days, probably the next 7 days, probably the next 10 days, the Atlantic Basin very quiet. It will ramp up. Our longer range stuff has stuff getting going here last week or so of July, more so August, September. And actually, we were down in Florida back at the end part of June in Key Largo. You go into the Gulf or the Sound waters or the Atlantic side, it literally is like bathwater down there already. But nothing going on and likely to stay that way. We do tend to keep an eye on the Pacific Basin. and that X represents maybe a little weak disturbance, and there's another one labeled one with about a 30 or 40% chance of development as El Nino winds down, and I wouldn't be surprised we're already out of it. Sometimes the data lags, and we'll start quickly ramping up into a La Nina setup. Well, that's the trip off that the Pacific waters get active. We're already setting the stage and table to get the Atlantic basin going, despite El Nino winding down, and I think that will just kind of move us into a more typical normalized Atlantic basin season with the number of storms, intensity of storms. So we may be getting moisture from different directions out of the Pacific and the Atlantic. So again, the thinking continues to be a pretty active weather pattern for the southern states, the southeastern part of the country, and there it is, at least on the model data over the next 24 hours. So you take a look at that, but you could easily multiply that by a factor of 7, 10, maybe 14 days. And this is at least the 7-day outlook of moisture. And the table here has conservative numbers that are maybe 3, 4, 5 inches. Probably some of these thunderstorms, they just sit and rain themselves out. Could be looking at double totals. Anyway, look at the Carolinas, Georgia, the Tennessee Valley, some of our livestock and poultry operations over there will get rain. Crops will get rain. Cotton will get rain. Quality issues, sure. Too late to probably matter for corn. Beans should help out, should get helped out by the rain, but it's too much of a good thing. This is just going to be a snapshot that you could take through the rest of July, probably very much into early August as well, and get ready for, again, what's going to be probably in a compact, hyperactive Atlantic basin system, feature one after another as we get deeper into August, September, and early October. Rains for some of the worst dry areas of western Texas, big rains, but that's usually flooding issues in through New Mexico, flash flooding issues, and still some of the dryness, drought-related areas of Kansas and Nebraska. Probably too late for the summer crops, I would think. Pasture lands, yes, and get some moisture in the grounds for upcoming winter wheat planting operations. So, Sarah, there is optimism for areas that need rain. And if you keep an eye on the Corn Belt locales here, there is a tendency here over the next, at least over the next 5 days or so of dry weather. We got to keep an eye on the I-70 corridor, east through Ohio and southeast from there. I think we're not done with rain. It may turn out to be too much of a good thing, but some of the worst hit areas of late out of Iowa, Illinois, parts of Indiana should get a reprieve here over the next 10 days to 2 weeks.
Yeah, lots of red on that map. Let's
Yeah.
hope it comes in at where they need it to be, and we don't have the excess as kind of looks like they might end up getting there in some of those areas. So what are you seeing for like the next 6 to 10 days? So you kind of give us, so you got some air maps there first, but
there you go.
Yeah, the forecast we're all interested to hear.
And we'll get to that here. And this is sort of the government perspective here, the upper air charts. There it is, the green squiggly lines. Remember, the hot ridge is still over the western and southwestern part of the country. The buckle, the dip is still there into the Ohio Valley, southeastern states. And you can kind of run, if you were to run the line out of the Atlantic, curl it into Florida, run it up in the open Atlantic. That is just either weak tropical features, we call them easterly waves, but they will also enhance the moisture to get wrung out over the southeastern and eastern parts of the country. So this is no cold wave, but because of cloudiness, I hit that in the wrong direction. Let me go back to it. Let me see. I will back this up. That is flailing hands here. There we go. The tendency for somewhat cloudier conditions, maybe an easing of livestock stress, maybe pasture lands that won't go through too much duress. So temperatures generally below average, but as those western and southern Corn Belt locales, they'll probably be looking at some slower crop development. That hot purple and orange area and red through the western states, that's 105 plus degree heat all the way up through Big Sky country. And they've already had a couple of spells of that. Here is this talk of the ongoing weather issues. We think there's something coming out of the Pacific, maybe something in the Western Gulf. Texas is going to get lit up, Red River Valley, and just a general malaise of wetter weather conditions, maybe not necessarily all at once, over the southeastern part of the country and the southwest as well. The outlook through the end of July kind of has that trough, that little U-shaped configuration, what we call lifting out. Behind it, there's that eastward progression of that hot ridge out of the western states into the plains, and any storms, what we call ridge riding or ring of fire storms, will be riding up out of the Canadian prairie, drop through the Great Lakes into the northeast of New England. That is pretty much typical textbook stuff for late July and August, getting into the waning days of July. Again, some moderation of temperatures. The heat is beginning to wane temporarily, but it's more of a progressive setup, so that probably reestablish itself on the plains. And there's still ample opportunity for rainfall, and still probably what will be, at least in the short term, some drier areas in the eastern and southern Corn Belt. Texas is, I think, got some issues coming up if they don't have them already around Houston and eastern areas from Beryl. It's just going to translate west and north towards the Metroplex. And again, some optimism for maybe not summer crops, but the pasture lands, maybe some elements of other summer crops into the eastern states with moisture ahead there. So on to our forecast here, Sarah, as we take a look at over the next let's take us through the second half of July into the first week of August. And yeah, temperatures expected to return to more seasonal levels across the eastern Corn Belt. If you are even keeled in the soil moisture department and you've had, nominal heat, and I don't think we'll have much heat really anywhere in the Corn Belt or the eastern plains in the short term, getting into late July, early August, kind of what you're looking for out there. You want to start getting some growing degree day units to get you where you need to be. There looks to be, and I think it's going to be a wide range of pollination and tasseling dates for the Corn Belt. I don't see a lot of issues going on regarding heat there, so that should move along. It's the obviously too much water and severe stuff that we've had to deal with. Eastern states are a little bit below average, mostly because of tropical systems, cloudiness, not necessarily cold air. This is not a cold air upper air pattern. And the weather trend continues on in the Ohio Valley, eastern Corn Belt. So again, I see an eradication of dryness and drought in the eastern and southern Corn Belt. Probably going to end up being too much of a good thing, I think, with time, with maybe a little more weed disease and insect pressure. Tough getting last or second or third hay cuts going, I think, in those Corn Belt locales. Pretty much normalized, precip pattern in the plains, which tends to be hit and miss, spotty in nature. So probably ongoing dryness and drought west. Too wet east and southeast, and we've got a couple of tropical systems. There's one out of eastern Texas that probably will have come through Old Mexico, and we finally begin to see something here. Last week of July, we're about 10 days out from that, or the very beginning part of August, before things begin to get cooking again in the Atlantic Basin. The heat is on the move, and this would be sort of in mid to late August, first week of September. Outlook, yes, it's going to be hot at Boone, Iowa. Seems like it is every year, but there may be an indication, maybe some low and maybe mid and upper 90s out there, so hotter than you would like it to be for farm progress. Long lines at the beverage stand and in the air-conditioned venues, I'm sure. And the heat will move east into the eastern Corn Belt locale. So there's that hot ridge, that arcing of the jet stream winds. They ride up through Montana. They dip down into the southeastern part of the country. Temps return to normal over the southeastern part of the country. And typically when the Atlantic Basin gets busy, it stops the eastward progression of weather systems by and large. So the story is at least normal precip to maybe a tendency for a bit below over the Corn Belt locales for some. That's good news. Welcome late season moisture for the Pacific Northwest, but by late summertime, not much going on other than wanting to get some moisture into the Rogue River Basin of Oregon and Willamette Valley, Washington State. Wet weather into the Northeast, down through the Southeast, and Texas with 2, maybe 3 systems. They may not be all necessarily named, but at least on our longer range weather maps and charts for the off of the Pacific, the Gulf, and the Atlantic as well. Maybe if we play our cards right, some of the areas that will have had a double crop season or the need for replanting should be in relatively good shape as we see it. This takes us here. If meteorological fall begins the 1st of September or roughly the 20th or 21st, astronomically speaking, we kind of split the middle here. What this would be the outlook into the first half of the month of September. And there's some late season heat, maybe good news from a dry down, moisture reduction. If you've been able to get through all the nonsense in the Corn Belt, warmth into the soils for newly sown winter wheat fields on the Plain States areas, and just a general warm to hot, humid weather pattern, basically from the Missouri River Valley onto the east, where, again, there's a tendency with the tropics getting busy in the Atlantic and the Gulf for a general drying process and pattern that gets going over much of the Corn Belt and especially Mississippi Valley, points north and west. So we think more or less a busy tropical season, a stoppage of any significant wet weather systems or cold air intrusion into the middle part of the country. Texas gets washed away. Gulf Coast areas are wet, and probably our first, I think, major hurricane is somewhere in that early to mid-September time frame. We may get a couple of Cat 1, Cat 2s or strong tropical systems, but the longer range stuff, and it's longer range stuff, but by then we have basically taken El Nino out of the equation. Wind shear is over with. We think there's a downgrade of Saharan dust. Too much dust inhibits cloud development. Just enough dust makes clouds grow into moisture, showers, and thunderstorms, and you get the circulations going off the African coast. So the bottom line is a busy system or two or three in the eastern states down through Florida. So, Sarah, that's pretty much the way we see things around here over the next several weeks, the next few months. There is really that longer range has been a little bit on edge once in a while, but that's usually in past El Nino to La Nina or La Nina to El Nino years in strong categories. That becomes a little more of a muddlesome, mushy, meddlesome outlook. It just doesn't line up right sometimes exactly. But I think we're probably in the early stages of a La Nina setup around here, and going forward, if you were able to survive this stuff, weather should be very much favorable for Corn Belt locales, Eastern Plains areas, Texas, the Southeast, Eastern states, and the initial stages, beneficial news with moisture. After that, I think all bets are off.
There you go. Yeah, always good though. We need to know how this crop's going to come out, right? So we can plan what our cost of feeding and all of that's going to be, and we need to secure some grain or what things we're looking at. So always great to look at the weather and what the temps, precipitation, drought, all that kind of stuff is going to could impact certain parts of the country.
Yeah, and usually, when we transition into a La Nina setup, not to ruin everyone's summer afternoon, but we tend to see a little more of a busier, earlier start to winter stuff across the heartland, the plains, and it's just really from driving with a stick, and all of a sudden you accidentally rip it into reverse, and the bottom of the engine just drops out. So the atmosphere may literally try to do that around here. And these tropical systems, by the way, are known in an active year to sometimes tug that jet stream southward and get into some somewhat earlier than usual cold snaps. But I think at least into the first half of September around here, we are in a relatively good shape. So if we can get some growing degree day units, get some dry time, if you made it okay, made it out like a bandit with all the severe weather across the plains or in the Corn Belt locales, then the weather I think is going to be to your benefit.
If you could just tweak that Farm Progress show weather there, Greg, give us a little nice, cool,
the line at the air conditioning stand starts here.
Just do that for me, would you?
I'll keep a space open for you.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for setting up the weather here for us today. If you heard any background noise, they're setting up the reception here for us, so we better let them have their room back here. But we appreciate you taking the time, and we'll be checking in with you next month. Thank you, Greg.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Always a pleasure, and hope to see folks out there at Farm Progress, and of course each and every week and this week in agribusiness with yours truly and Mr. Mike Pearson.
Exactly. We want to thank all of you for joining in as well today. We appreciate you taking time to be with us. You can watch this segment over again on feedstuffs.com under the Feedstuffs 365 nav tab, or share it with your friends and colleagues. Until next time, for Feedstuffs 365, I'm Sarah Muirhead.